Hey, what's up everybody? I want to show you a farm implement I built. This here is a soil aerator. Now, similar units will cost probably $2,500, $3,000. And I made this one for a few $100s. And if you have a welder and some scrap iron, you can build something like this. So first of all, you're gonna need a water heater tank, but it has to be a nice thick one, and it has to be the gas water heater, because electric water heater doesn't have this central tube that goes right down the center. A gas water heater does have a central tube, goes right down the center. And then you can take some automotive bearings. These are cheap bearings I found on Amazon or online for, I don't know, 50, 60 bucks for a pair. And they're like a 6-bolt pattern front wheel drive automotive wheel bearing. And they just happen to fit around that central tube where I could weld it. And there's enough material here that I could weld carefully. You don't want to get into the bearings with your welds, but I was able to weld it onto this frame. The frame is just scrap angle iron I happen to have around. So you have to make sure your dimensions, you know, leave clearance for the spikes. Okay. The spikes, these are called aeration tines. They're a plug aerator tines, and you can get a set of 30 or so for like $100. And then I had to special order some moly steel that was the right diameter, where I could like cut them to length and drill a hole through and weld them on. And I welded these little angle gussets to kind of give it a little stiffness, and those worked fine. And then I had to add, you know, I didn't have enough rows, so I added an intermediate row so that it would track better on the ground. It wouldn't, you know, be like so choppy while it rolled. So I put these intermediate chisels in here, and they're just steel I got from the junkyard and cut a angle cut on them to make them a sharp chisel. Only problem I have had so far is that they bend a little, so I probably need to straighten these out with a hammer and then put a reinforcement gusset or something so that they don't bend, you know. But that's really the only issue I've had with it. I filled it with sand, which I would recommend. I didn't fill it with water. I filled it with sand. And so it weighs about 700 pounds. And, oh, and the last and kind of the most important thing, you need a 3-point hitch. You can get a blank 3-point hitch attachment. I want to say it was $100 on Amazon. And I welded this bad boy on here, and that allows me to attach it to the tractor 3-point hitch, standard 3-point hitch tractor. And it comes with the giblet pieces, the pins and everything. So for a few $100s and some welding, I made a soil aerator. And it kind of reminds me of Hobart's Funnies. Have you ever heard of Hobart's Funnies? So there was a guy in World War II, a British military person named Hobart. And he designed these things that would go on the front of a tank. They would rotate, and they were driven, right? And it had chains on it. It was a chain flail. And then this whole section would pivot upwards, so that way they could shred through razor wire and landmines and get a tank into dangerous areas where it would otherwise have blown off the tracks of the tank. So kind of reminds me of that. We're going to test it out. This soil, this time of year, you can see it's getting a little thin, a little brittle. The cattle have kind of mushed it down, and you know, it's decent grass considering it hasn't rained very much. But it'd be a lot better if we got some soil aeration. And actually, there's an easier way to do it. Really, the best thing you can do is just manage your cattle better than what I've done and get them off the land, you know, and put down hay or shred you know, do a brush hog and knock down the tall grass and sort of like shred it down. And that puts a layer on the soil that keeps the moisture in and allows the grass to grow better. Here's another attachment I made. It's kind of just a bumper welded up and bolted onto the front of the tractor. And what that allows me to do is if I get an implement or a hay bale that's like super heavy on the back, I can put concrete blocks, cinder blocks on the front here and weigh it down for balance. Turns out I don't need it with 700 pounds, but when you get up around 1,000 pounds, you need to start putting some weight on the front.
See, this soil is so hard that even with 700 pounds, it barely makes a dent in it. So I got into bottom land here, and it does a little better in this good soil. These are all steers. That's questionable, Harold. Harold, I thought you had a boyfriend, and now you're cheating. Questionable. Anyway, the pin came off of this, so I think I gotta prop it up with a stick here and then put her back on there, and then we're gonna smash some stuff. All right, let's see if it'll smash this old brush pile. That's working pretty good. Well, it smashed it up a little bit, somewhat useful. The bigger logs didn't quite get chopped into, but it has some use. The main problem I'm having is these, being that this is thin, relatively thin, these are bending, so they need reinforcements. My chisel blades need reinforcement. And also I broke one of these pins. It doesn't turn very well, so you got to be real careful. You can only kind of go on a straight with it. If you try turning sharply, it's going to stress these pins. And but you usually have a box of replacement pins anyways, so yeah, this is just a few minutes outside dicking around. So anyway, farm grants, federal land grants for money for farming. So if you guys know of any grants that I could get for just to help out around the farm, let me know, because it's a catch-22. Like, I could go to the city, get a job, and have money, but then I wouldn't be here to do the farm stuff. And so it's better if I could just have money. And I know the government spent more money on dumber things, so if you could help, that'd be great. Anyway, so this part of Texas, you know, it didn't used to have all this thicket of trees. The land had been cleared before. So I'll give you a quick history of the land in North Texas before European interference. This land probably didn't have as much thicket. It was probably more of the larger trees towards the creeks, and then the hillsides were all tall grasses that would have seasonal fires sweep thousands and thousands of acres. Once white people started farming, they started sectioning off land and putting lots of cattle, chopping down lots of trees. And that worked okay for a while until the Great Depression era, where there was a dust bowl. So if you have an extended period of drought and overgrazing, which, by the way, overgrazing doesn't mean necessarily too many cattle. It means too few cattle and poorly managed. But anyways, if you do overgrazing and the land gets brittle, it doesn't have, it's in a precarious situation when it becomes brittle like that if you have a drought, which the Dust Bowl did do. After that, into the 30s and 40s, they started doing contour plows after the Dust Bowl to try to unscrew up the land that got screwed up. Because if you have a Dust Bowl, a drought,
and then it rains a bunch, all your topsoil washes away. So they have soil conservation lakes around here and soil conservation work that was done in the 30s and 40s. I'll show you an example of it here real quick. So you see this ridge here? I don't know if you can see it, but there's kind of a ridge, a hump in the soil. It's long and linear. That's a contour plow. And like I said, they put these in the 30s and 40s to prevent soil erosion in the event of prolonged period of drought followed by heavy rains. And in my case, the soil's a little brittle just because I need to get I think I need to sell some of my cows here. And we do this, it happens like this every year. There's a drought, and then in the spring it rains. But this is the contour plow. You can see this was put in way before our time. I would assume it was in the 30s or 40s when they put those contour plows in. So, long story short, we're still trying to recover the topsoil quality. And, you know, the cow manure helps, but you have to be able to mix it in, and the soil gets so brittle and hard that it doesn't want to mix in. And it looks a lot better in the spring, you know. And a lot of farmers would say, hey man, you gotta chop all those trees and get grass and more cattle. But I don't think that's wise, because these trees are hedging your bets. You know, if half the land is trees, you've got a root structure and everything else to prevent erosion. Plus the cattle will do what I like to call vertical grazing. I made that shit up. I don't know if it's a real thing, but they'll eat up to neck height, you know, about 5 foot. They'll trim it up and just kind of thin out the brush around the edges, because they will eat the leaves off of different trees. So here's a section of fence through the thicket that I maintain. And the longhorns, actually, they're hard on fences because they bump fences with their horns. And I wouldn't necessarily recommend longhorns because, you know, they have a good disposition, but if they happen to, one or two of them don't have a good disposition, they're kind of armed, you know. So it's challenging with them, but one of my boys is pretty cool, so I like him. But pretty much the cattle will, once you get a trail established along a fence line, the cattle will keep it clear for you. And I wanted to talk about range law, because in this county, in Grayson County, it used to be open range up until 1978, I believe 79. When it was open range, it was a policy called fence out, which means that cattle went everywhere. And if you wanted to keep them out of your house or your garden or anything else, you needed to fence them out. Well, since the 1979 change in this county, it's fence in. And in fact, most counties in Texas are now fence in, which means if you have livestock, you have to fence them in to keep them from getting on the roads or whatever. There are a few open range counties in Texas. So for those of you that are like, I want to move to Texas, like, well, if you're going to do any kind of ranching, or if you really enjoy that authentic Texas lifestyle or what have you, you want to go to open range. There's a handful of counties that are still open range. But yeah, fence in versus fence out, it makes a huge difference in the whole culture of the area. It really does. And I think that's one thing that's missing about Texas. Texas has a reputation of all this, you know, open range cowboy stuff, but once it goes closed range, it's just like any other state or whatever, and you got to do what you got to do to keep your animals in. Gotta have you one of these for watering the cattle. That's the old style barbed wire. We found this here on the land, and that could be, shoot, 1920s, but it's been around a long time. And thing about that stuff is it's old. I know the neighbor, the Johnson family, they, at one time in the 1850s, they've been here for something like 6 generations, and they had owned hundreds and hundreds of acres, including this section of land. And the land was originally used for oxen, which are draft animals. I don't know if you know this, but an ox is a cow. It's the same thing. It's just a certain they usually go for specific breeds of cattle and train them to pull carts and whatnot. And that's an oxen. It's not like an oxen is all that different from regular cattle. It's just a certain breed of cattle that they train to pull carts. Well, with the invention of machinery, that business obviously went out of existence for the most part. Another thing I noticed, these are the old fence posts. These we recovered from the land. And they're a thicker steel. They're a thicker steel and a larger dimension than the newer fence posts. This green one happens to be newer. I installed this one probably 20 years ago. And the reason I'm letting you know that is, well, the orange ones are stronger and more durable. But also, I don't know if you can even get them anymore, maybe somewhere. But when you buy gear for this, if you buy like electric fence components, like see those yellow deals, they barely want to fit on the old orange posts. They barely fit on the old orange posts because they're just a thicker dimension, so you have to kind of fight with them more. They're designed, the yellow plastic snaps for electric fences are designed for these green newer ones. So this is Harold, and this guy over here, that's Kumar. And this is Red, we call him Little Red. See that fly on him? Those things are nasty. That's a horse fly. They're about 1 inch long. And yes, I've been bit by one, and yes, they hurt. So what we do is, you take permethrin, livestock spray, treatment for flies, and you mix it with water. And then the easiest way I found to get it on them, because they're a little spooky about being touched a bunch. Like I can pet Harold, but the others, like, they kind of get weird if you try to rub on them too much. So what I got is this cheap squirter deal for like toys, pools, summertime play or whatever at the dollar store for like literally $1. And I use it like a syringe, and then it'll go about 20 feet. I just squirt the flies off of them with the treatment. This is a typical supplemental feed. They call them range cubes. I don't know why they call them range cubes. They're actually cylinders. So yeah, I'm probably gonna have to sell him soon, just because, well, the management of the land and everything. This is Harold. He's pretty cool. Come here, buddy. This one here, Red, man, he'll try to hit you with the horns. He's crazy. Come here. He's a little wacky. He's a little wacky. So just to give you a comparison, this is land that's been a little bit overgrazed. You can tell there's still grass growing, but it's real low and the soil's brittle, and there's a variety of, that's ironweed over there. That's actually a medicinal plant. There's a lot of there's blue sage right there coming up. A lot of medicinal plants the cattle won't eat. Whereas if you look over here, there's been no cattle grazed on this land for a while. I mean, many decades. Even still, I mean, it's a better quality grass, but even still, when you get up and look close, it's still brittle as hell, you know? So even with the ideal management conditions, it's just, you get a drought and it's gonna get brittle. I'll show you a section of land that had cattle on it that hasn't had cattle on it for about a year. Here's a section of land that had cattle on it, and then I got them off of here with an electric fence and let the land recharge in this section. And you can see we got the blue stem grass coming up pretty good. There's these flowers, which are a nuisance. They're an invasive species, Scabiosa autoperpia, I think is the name. It's called the pincushion flower, and bees love them. So, and I think they kind of help the soil
but the cows won't eat them, and they're really invasive. So I probably need to set the brush hog about a couple foot up off the ground and just thin them out a little bit. But you can see this land, even it is still brittle, but it had cattle on it, and just with a year off, it's doing a little bit better. Even though it looks brown, there's green down below. And you can see what happens here, this area here. Again, without any, it's been grazed on a little too long, so it thinned it out. But again, the trees are holding the soil down. If it rains, there's enough brush to sort of keep the soil from totally washing away. Thing about cattle too, another thing about cows is once they get used to going somewhere, they'll continue to go there. So if you try sectioning them off in pattern, you know, rotational grazing with conventional fences, they will jump those fences to graze where they were used to grazing. So the only way to keep them from doing that is with an electric fence right here like that. That'll teach them to stay back, and then they won't try to jump the fence. Guys, that's about it for today. It's just too damn hot right now, so we're gonna call it a day, and I'll catch y'all later. Bye.